a fantastic panel here tonight, so let me just get around to introducing them. Of course, Mr. Maira here, Member Planning Commission and also a member at the National Innovation Council. Mr. Deshpande, great to have you here with us. Of course, the Deshpande Foundation, everyone here is familiar with. And he's also has been appointed by President Obama to the co-chairmanship of the National Advisory Council on Innovation and Entrepreneurship, which is a group established to support the President's innovation strategy. So lots of useful insights as well on that front. Mr. Khemka, of course, of the Sun Group, and also once again the Khemka Foundation doing some great work in the field. So we're really eager to hear a lot about the kind of entrepreneurs that you've been interacting with and the kind of experiences that all of you have had so far. Let me just start off with you, Mr. Maira, since we've decided to put you in the spotlight first. But what I wanted to get a sense of was that we've been hearing about the new fund that has been launched as well, the India Inclusive Innovation Fund. So to start off with, if you could tell us a little bit about that.
This National India Inclusive Innovation Fund is an innovation in itself. It's a government partnering with private fund providers. Some are from development organizations, but other are financial organizations, in directing money towards small entrepreneurs who got ideas which are going to have social impact. Okay, now these ideas which have social impact, just like you're suggesting, is very difficult to convert their impact into money measurable terms. So on one side you've got people putting money who see things in terms of, well, how much money will I get back? So impact is to be assessed mostly in the money that it produces, whereas here we are wanting impact in other terms. At the same time, we want the fund to be sustainable also. So these ventures, these social ventures, must at least pay back, if I can say, the cost of money. But more than that, we want to make it somewhat attractive to the financial people who are partnering with the government to put in the money. So how do you measure a social impact? This is a challenge that even business is finding, as you know. As businesses are saying, oh, we don't need to be just managing only our bottom line. We want to manage the impact that our business has on the environment and on communities. Learning that the measurement in financial terms or even any other mathematical terms of social impact is not easy. But that doesn't mean that you won't do it. So we are going to learn about how to measure impact also through these hundreds of ventures that we are getting into with them. So it's a co-learning process between the entrepreneurs and between us through this fund.
Absolutely. I mean, there is, it's still a developing field and there is a lot, of course, to figure out in this space. Mr. Deshpande, in terms of how technology can play a role here, if you could just stress upon for us really the importance that technology has in this space. And
right. So it's really two things. You know, I think what technology makes possible is things affordable. You know, I left India in 1973. The big difference I find between 73 and 2013 is that suddenly now the country has access to technology because the cost of technology has come way down. The affordability of technology has spread very broadly. And so the need, you know, innovation is, necessity is always the mother of invention. And the necessity in India is low-cost, affordable solutions that can scale. But the new India seems to have a lot of young people who have confidence, who are not scared of numbers. I mean, $1 billion is nothing in India these days. They are globally competitive in pretty much in every field. And so suddenly you have a mix of these two things where you have the global competence plus these huge problems staring right in your face. And it's happening in India more than anywhere else. And people have the freedom to do things, unlike China. And therefore, you know, I think Africa and some of these places, they still don't have the 1 or 2% of the people who have the global competence to actually use those techniques. And so I'm very hopeful that India will actually become a beacon of hope for the rest of the country.
And that's the key word that I have heard you use many times, and it's essential, I think, particularly for entrepreneurs in this field when they're up against so many challenges. And that's actually what I want to ask you, Mr. Khemka, because you also really encourage leadership and, look out for those qualities, when you're, of course, interacting with such entrepreneurs. And I think that's key, because innovation and the idea is one thing, but the ability to actually take it forward is also critical. Isn't that correct?
I completely agree with you. There's a lot of talk, I think, about leadership.
Yes.
And if we look back in history, imagine a country, hyperinflation, industrial sector collapsing, huge unemployment. 10 years later, that country, full employment, industrial sector buzzing, no inflation, very strong currency, and all made possible by one leader. His name, Adolf Hitler. Great leader. He was able to correct the economy, create companies like Volkswagen, which are still leaders in their field today. He scaled, he had social impact, he used technology to do that. But was he a great leader? So the question is, leadership is not enough.
Okay.
Education is not enough. It's all about the values that underpin great leadership. Gandhi, Mandela, Desh Deshpande, Sam Pitroda, people we look up to and admire as leaders who are actually making a difference with some humanity. And so the question that our foundation is focused on is, where are those leaders? And are those leaders getting the support they need? And so that is really what we're very focused on. I think, yes, we have huge problems and huge challenges in India and frankly on the planet. But I think that the need of the hour is great leadership.
Is there a particular formula or a particular model that is working more than others, especially since we're looking at not just NGOs, but actually for-profit models? How are you managing to find instances where perhaps something that has worked in the private space can also be implemented in this particular way?
I think it goes the other way. In the private space, we think about it more in a transactional way. But when you think about social impact, it can't be transactional. It's much more relational. I think what Shiv is also suggesting. So I think the world is at the point where I come from the private sector, having spent 45 years there, now coming to government, recognizing that in the private sector, things are rather simple. In fact, because as we say, we can measure things in purely financial terms, because we've simplified it. But the real world is not that simple.
Right.
You've got to imagine value or estimate values for things which can't be converted into financial things. So it's more actually business now wanting to and needing to learn from the NGO space, the social space, how leadership, how it's exercised there. Okay. And so as we've got into developing an ecosystem in this country which will help the social innovations to have impact, which is our question for discussion today, we have been delving into where are the models available, and if they're not, what are the emerging ones which we could take advantage of and develop further in our country so we can have much larger impact from social innovations, because India certainly needs to have much larger impact through social innovations than perhaps any other country in the world does today. And in that we've learnt a few things. First is that a leader is a person who does something first when it's not known whether it's going to succeed or not. Okay? And a good leader, and taking Shiv's point, from our point, a good leader would be one who does something which would benefit others in a good way. It's not about your own power and about just making money for yourself and your own investors only. Okay? As we look around, we're finding that probably India has far more examples of good leadership at the social impact level than any other country in the world. But yet, one, we don't have enough, and number two, their efforts are not yet producing large enough impact. So how do you scale up? So we have in the National Innovation Council worked out our strategy. It's a two-track strategy. One is to help individual fireflies to grow, and many more to come. So that is through the National Innovation or the India Innovation Fund. I mean, they need something initially so that they can grow and produce more light themselves. And there are others I could mention as we get on. But the other one is that to take an idea and say, let this idea have a large-scale impact, we tend to then think in a very business-like way. For example, if the McDonald's formula is a good one and works, then let's have McDonald's everywhere. So there's a scaling model there which says take the same thing and do it everywhere the same way. Now that works in very simple settings. If it's about, flipping hamburgers in a well-designed kitchen format, you could replicate it. But in the social space, as someone had earlier mentioned, each situation is different and needs to be, because the people are different in each situation. So you can't take a standard and replicate it everywhere. It has to be, as it were, discovered again and again in different places together. So how do you scale this up? So we have learned that there is a model available, in Japan actually it came out of, through the total quality movement, where people were provided in their settings, whether on the shop floor or out in public spaces, with a way to work together, to think together, to analyze together, to make an experiment together, to learn from the experiment together, and improve their situation. Now, if you can scale up that process of people being able to work together, figure out the complex system together with some systematic tools, system analysis tools, design experiments, learn, and produce results, many of these happening all over will increase the impact. Okay? So that strategy requires now a platform to disseminate just simple ways of thinking, as it were, about how do you organize and get things done, as was done in the TQM movement of Japan. So the other strategy is to create platforms through which one disseminates not particular solutions, but ways of finding solutions and the ways of working with others to not just find, but implement the solutions. So the National Innovation Council is also working on finding what are those skills that people need to work together. It was mentioned earlier that clusters and small entrepreneurs do benefit very greatly by working with other small entrepreneurs, but in settings in which they're collaborating with each other, not merely picking up information from each other, but creating some synergy together. So we are also focusing on developing the capacity in this country for people to work more collaboratively in either in-place clusters or virtual clusters, to get more impact out of small things. So thus, as I said, many fireflies, bouncing light with each other, we can have a much larger impact than we are having today.
All right, that's a lot. That's of course a lot of different solutions to ponder over. But, Mr. Deshpande, I mean, give us a sense of some of the instances you've come across as well, because very actively with the foundation, of course, you've also seen several examples, particularly in Hubli, for instance, of entrepreneurs trying to, of course, create an impact. So give us a sense of really what you've taken away from these experiences.
Well, I think the way I see that is, governments are like large corporations. They are not capable of innovating. Not in a negative way. It's not a negative comment. It's just that the size doesn't allow you to innovate. So in the for-profit world, the way large companies innovate is they let the angel investors and the venture capitalists actually do experiments. Similarly, I think I've been trying to work on, I'm not much of a policy guy, I'm more an entrepreneur, but the little work that I'm doing in Washington is I'm trying to get people to do policy by proof of concept. For example, in Washington, you have a lot of these Brookings guys who are just super smart. They have all kinds of data. But they have so much data, they can come up with any idea and they have enough data to fit the curve. And so they don't have a conviction. And they cannot have a conviction because they are in Washington. They don't get onto the real thing. But if you talk to entrepreneurs who do real things and you say, this is my problem, what should I do? They're so certain, they'll say, of course you should do this. And you say, why? They say, well, it worked for me. And so the entrepreneurs who have a very narrow view of the situation tend not to have a concept of policy. So a good way to bring them together is to let the philanthropic dollars do the experimentation. Let the money used for experimentations. But when something is working, it looks promising, we should find a way of scaling it together with and if appropriate, adopt it. Some of them lend themselves to free market economy, in which case they can just build companies and make them profitable. But if it's a part of the government grant program, they should adopt it. And I'm seeing a lot of programs in India where that's happening. For example, one of the programs I'm involved with is Akshay Patra, where government actually embraced the whole program and they fund most of the program. Whatever they would have spent otherwise, they give it to the organization.
And it's an example that's actually been very successful.
Very successful. And so what I think we need to do is which is very nice because, Arun and Sam and so on, they're actually reaching out to the entrepreneurs and not sort of have this concept of NGO being non-governmental organization and they're doing something because the government cannot do, but more they are the innovators. If they find a solution that makes sense, government should have an M&A group which actively keeps looking for these things and embracing these innovations.
Mr. Khemka, how can we ensure greater access to whether it's capital, whether it's to mentorship?
The free market, certainly in the US and Silicon Valley and places like that, creates and tests actually perseverance in entrepreneurs. So you try, you fail, you try again, you fail. And actually in Silicon Valley, if you failed a few times, it's a badge of respect. I think in India too, there's an emerging culture of entrepreneurial effort and this kind of venture framework, institutional framework, and I think it's hard.
A lot of entrepreneurs reach out to that limited community of venture capitalists and angel investors, but even within that are finding it tough to get that access or get someone to actually tell them, okay, if this idea is working, great, or if it's not working, this is what's wrong with it. How do you build that relationship with a lot of the entrepreneurs out there?
Well, I'd say two things. Number one, in the for-profit world, there are lots of venture capital firms now in major cities, and it is the 5,000 to 5 problem. So it's not purely an Indian problem, it's a US problem, it's a problem in Europe, anywhere in the world. It's not easy to get venture funding. And after that, it's not easy to build a great business. In terms of the social space, foundations like ours will look at opportunities and things that we think are interesting and try and help them scale up. It's like venture funding, but obviously we're not looking for a financial return. We're looking for things that we believe can scale.
Absolutely, but exactly.
Well, I think you really have to think about it in a bimodal way. If you're a policymaker, it's your job to make sure that you reduce the friction, you reduce the hurdles so that people can actually do it. But if you're the entrepreneur, whether it's the social sector or the for-profit sector, you have to fight for the opportunity to actually do things. And it's not easy because, as I was telling the group yesterday, that I've never met an entrepreneur who doesn't think his idea is not the best, the greatest, right?
Exactly.
But not every idea is a winning idea. So obviously, this experimentation is not a negative thing. But what you can do within the ecosystem is to get more and more people to play the game so that the quality of the game goes up. So you have to encourage entrepreneurs, if that's whom you work with, to actually not give up. They need to just keep fighting because if not this hurdle, there's going to be some other hurdle. And so the entrepreneurs have to be entrepreneurial and the policymakers have to sort of figure out how they can remove the hurdles for them along. But it'll never be zero hurdles.
The connection between policymakers and entrepreneurs, yeah? You're pointing out that is not an easy one, right? And I'm here now, a policymaker, and I've been in the entrepreneurial and the corporate world. And the job here is for us to create an environment in which more entrepreneurship can flourish, which will have good impact on people. You can have leadership and entrepreneurship. I could take other examples than Hitler. I mean, you can have a bad impact, but we have to be watchful that what we are helping will have a good impact on people. So we are here to encourage entrepreneurship. At the same time, if something wrong happens, either too much of the money is blown away or bad impact comes, the people will blame the government. So in society, the government has a role to ensure it's the last recourse for stability. It is the last recourse for stability. And the entrepreneur is going further and further out and taking risks. So what are we doing? Let me describe. Firstly, in terms of managing the government itself, we have had very large programs all across the country on education, on child nutrition and so on, which are not having a good impact. Now, all these programs were devised on, someone had a great idea, which was tested internationally and stuff. Well, here is India, apply it everywhere. So huge government programs applied all across the country in a very standard fashion, controlled largely from the center also. Now, all our states are saying to us, please, one size does not fit all. Give us some flexibility. Well, give us money, but let us determine what to do with the money. Now, again, if I'm giving the money and someone misuses it somewhere, the government is going to get blamed. It's public money. So we are devising the architectures of our programs of assistance such that there are funds for flexible innovation, some parts, and then there has to be some boundaries around that innovation also. So I'm quite encouraged that the way the government is and the Planning Commission has been working with innovators, consulting them, listening to them, we are devising good rules of the game of engagement between government and innovators, which will enable both sides to play the roles expected of them. Okay? The government does have a role to ensure stability. The government, therefore, must be much more watchful. The skills of the policymaker and the evaluator have to be quite high, quite sophisticated. And the persons that the policymaker is helping must also appreciate this. And not just to blame them and saying, you're being overly, let me use the word bureaucratic here, in asking me these questions. We owe it to ask some questions also. But we're coming into a good place. And our National Innovation Council has really helped in putting together this idea that there's a need for innovation and experimentation. At the same time, it's government money, quite a lot of it, and it's for impact on the lives of people who don't have much. We owe it to use this money very well to produce those values, those results.
Okay. In terms of, if we were to just sum up the key challenges going ahead in this space, particularly taking from all the examples that you have come across, what's worked, what hasn't worked, going ahead from here on, what would be the key challenges that we need to work with right now?
You know, I think what's impressive here is that all these 100 people, they are very well versed in technology, management principles. You know, they really come from this global competence group. And so I think they have all the skills that they need. But they need to continue to sort of find out new models of sustainability, new models of how do you actually create models which can sustain themselves financially. How do you raise money? You know, I think that's something that India is not very good at. You know, in US, it's $300 billion a year. And the non-profit world employs about 14% of the population. 14% of the workforce is actually in the non-profit sector. And it's a big profession by itself. I mean, you know, MIT, for example, has 150 people full-time who do nothing but raise money. And they raise about $400 million a year. And so you cannot raise money just casually. And so if you want to get serious, if you think that that's the only possible way, you know, it's either free market economy, government programs, or charity. And if it's charity, it has to be a very broad-based charity. So, for example, Akshay Patra last year, out of the 150 crores, we raised about 60 crores. And a lot of that money now is beginning to come from teachers and small people and everything else. It's a very diversified base. But I think people have to learn how to raise that money in a sustainable way if that's a long-term viable business model that they have.
I'm afraid we've run out of time, but I really want to thank very much all of our panelists here today. It really was a pleasure to listen to all of you speak and at the same forum, because some of this advice is really priceless. Thank you all for being a great audience. A big hand for them.
Thank you.